Hello and welcome to Health Professional Radio. I'm your host, Neal Howard. Thank you for joining us today. Our guest in studio is Mr. Jack Estes, decorated Vietnam veteran who spent much of his life as an advocate for the needs of veterans, both with his charity, the Fallen Warriors Foundation, and in his writing. Now, he was recently featured in the Wall Street Journal for Memorial Day, but he's also written for Newsweek, the Oregonian, the LA Times, and many others, including his critically acclaimed Vietnam memoir, A Field of Innocence, and his brand new novel, A Soldier's Son, which was recently released. Welcome to Health Professional Radio, Jack.
Well, thank you.
Thank you so much for returning. You know, when we were here before in the other segment, we talked about your experiences in Vietnam. We also talked about some of the effects that seeing the things that combat revealed to you had a huge effect on how you reacted when you returned home. Let's talk a little bit about what happened when you got back from Vietnam. I think you mentioned that you're in your second marriage now, and it's lasted for many, many years, yeah?
Well, that's correct. When I
Yeah.
came home, though, from Vietnam, I was still 19,
Hmm.
and I was married, and we had a baby, and that was I believe it was in August of 1969, and then by November of that year, my wife had left me. And, years later, we look back through some of the bitterness and the reasons. And the main reason that she left was because I scared her. It was the look in my eyes and the way that I reacted to her. So I'd just come from a situation where I had experienced things above and beyond the realm of normal human experience. And that had an impact on me, which in turn had an impact on her.
Mm.
And that's what PTSD is about. It impacts the veteran, the family, and the community, and of course the children.
Now, you are in this situation. Your wife has left you. How long was it between realizing that things just aren't right for me personally, and someone diagnosing you, correctly with post-traumatic stress disorder?
Well, I was 19, turned 20 when she left, and PTSD wasn't defined until decades later.
Okay.
And so I had these feelings inside of me, but I was ashamed to express them. And one of the things that impacted veterans of my era, and even holds true to some extent, was the feeling of that you have a weakness in you if you are allowed to be controlled by the feelings that you have relative to Vietnam. And to go see a doctor would be shameful. See a therapist about this would be shameful. And of course, there weren't really any progressive programs at that time. So I went through a number of years of dropping in and out of college and working. I worked with the railroad, the moving track, and chopping ice out of tunnels, and was an iron worker. And finally, I started to sell real estate, and I met my wife.
Mm-hmm.
And I told her that I was working on a book, and she was fascinated by that because she was a literature major. And through my book and trying to sell real estate, a building that she actually owned, we got married.
Huh.
And it wasn't until we were married and a number of years later that PTSD, that I was trying to work on PTSD. For example, she had been after me for a number of years to go in to see about getting clinically diagnosed. And I didn't want to do it because I was too ashamed. I finally went in, I sat down with the intake counselor there and filled out a bunch of questionnaires, and she said, "You'll be the easiest person to be diagnosed for PTSD that I've seen." And she says, "Go home and take these papers and fill them out and bring them back to me." And I said, "Okay." Well, I went home and I didn't go back for over a year.
Wow.
Because of that shame and remorse
Wow.
and grief that I felt. So actually, it was many years into my marriage before I really started attacking this problem seriously.
Well, let's fast forward to the time when you decided that it was time to do something on a much more large scale level to help others like yourself. Let's talk about the Fallen Warrior Foundation.
Well, it started in 1993 when I made a trip to Vietnam, a humanitarian trip with my wife and our 2 children.
Mm-hmm.
And it was my wife's thoughts and consideration that if I were to go back to the village that I used to live in, and if I were to carry boxes of toys and medical and educational supplies and was able to deliver them back to my village, it would replace the muscle memory I had of carrying a machine gun.
Uh-huh.
And so it really started from there. And we were able to form a charitable nonprofit and bring people in to sit on the board. And over the years, we've done many different things. We did, for instance, I did 3 more trips to Vietnam. I took doctors and nurses to the villages that I lived in, and also to the dilapidated, run-down hospitals. So I took doctors and nurses there to care for the poorest of the poor. And then I was able to take back kidney dialysis machines and other medical, tools. And I also took a group of Vietnam veterans, all of them disabled,
Mm-hmm.
and we were able to get them back to their original point of pain. In other words, to a place where the most horrible experience happened to them. And they were also carrying toys and other things for villagers, and all of that helped them deal with PTSD, or even identify it if they didn't understand that that's what they were going through.
You've done quite a lot of writing to different journals and whatnot, the LA Times, Newsweek. Have you written specifically about PTSD or helping veterans to identify that original point of pain and then deal with PTSD?
Yes,
yeah, okay.
To answer your
yeah,
question.
Yeah.
And much of the writing that I've done has to do with PTSD. When I was laying in the middle of the field of the rice paddy one time, and people were being shot and killed around me, and I felt like God spoke to me and protected me. That's something that I experienced, and I think everybody wonders about what their life is about, what they're meant to do. Well, I decided that long ago when I was in college, when I finally started to settle down, that my gift and my duty and my mission is to help honor veterans and at the same time address their pain. And I do that through my writing. But the Fallen Warriors Foundation has done many, many more things. For instance, we did 17 years of retreats for veterans and their loved ones. And our retreats were different. They were actually ahead of the time. And this, again, was my wife's idea. We brought in a Zen Buddhist monk who happened to have been a Vietnam veteran and was the crew chief on helicopters and shot down several times over Vietnam. His name is Claude Anchin Thomas, and he headed these silent meditation retreats and helped deal with the pain associated with war. Mm-hmm. And we've produced or co-produced a couple of videos, which you can, by the way, if you want to look up any of this information, you can go to jackestes.com, and there's also many essays on that and information about the Fallen Warriors. But now we're phasing out of the Fallen Warriors Foundation. We've got one last thing that we're going to be doing, and that'll happen next year. And it'll be a night of remembrance, and it'll be more of a Christian kind of event. Okay. And anyway, we're still trying to formulate everything for that, but we'll be doing that.
It'll be coming together pretty quick, though. Yeah. Let's talk to our healthcare professionals who are listening. The folks that are caring for us at the VA and our respective hospitals around the country and around the world. What is that one thing in your experience as a longtime sufferer of PTSD, who's dedicated your time to helping other soldiers with this disorder? Talk to the healthcare professional who's trying to understand how to connect with the patient.
Well, that's a pretty difficult question, but I would think that one of the things that the veterans need to know, because they don't know this when they first experience PTSD, they don't know that they're not alone. They don't think they think that what they think and feel is unique. And you have to do it, of course, in a gentle way. I believe in talk therapy, but I also believe in many different modalities. But I would suggest that that's the first thing that they need to do. And the veteran needs to talk about what he's experienced. And what's helped me is, of course, I talk about it quite a bit, in high schools and colleges and in other situations, and I write about it. And maybe a person that can't talk about it, right then in front of a therapist, maybe you could ease them into revealing some of their pain by saying, well, why don't you just write a couple of paragraphs, at home, think about it a little bit, and come back and let's talk about what you've written about how you feel.
Right. It's been a pleasure talking with you, Jack. Thanks so much for coming in.
You betcha.
You've been listening to Health Professional Radio. I'm your host, Neal Howard, in studio with Jack Estes, decorated Vietnam veteran and founder of the Fallen Warriors Foundation. Transcripts and audio of this program are available at healthprofessionalradio.com.au and also at hpr.fm, and you can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes.